All very important and interesting questions. I'm sure I will not be able to answer all of them. I'll try a few of them. I'll try and answer a few of them. Okay.
So one more question from Bangalore.
I think please wait. We'll come in the next round. Actually.
No, I'm from Isaac, Bangalore.
No. I'm saying that you please have to wait for the next round. This is the first 6 you have taken. Please.
Hello, Hamsa, how are you?
Sir, I'm fine, sir. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, nice to see you here. Yeah, we will take you in the next round. Yeah.
The next round.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So you can also compliment what I'm saying. I mean, it's not that I have to answer all the questions.
No.
You can also compliment wherever possible. Okay, with regard to women entrepreneurship and COVID, that is from Dr. Reddy's question. I mean, generally, we know that entrepreneurship has been affected because, as Professor Das has already said, backward-forward linkages, that's one very serious concern as to what is available, inputs and output, where do you sell it, how do you sell it, what are the distributors, and then also the lockdown story is there. So generally, all enterprises has been affected, whether you're talking about small, medium, large, anything is affected. But because of the what we call precariousness under which small and marginal work, of course, the conditions are much worse over there. But I will give you an example where things have done well for COVID also. Kerala is, for example, the moment COVID started coming up in a big way, hand sanitizers and masks preparation was given to Kudumbashree. Kudumbashree units started making it in a big way, and they actually started, many units made a lot of money out of COVID actually. So, and the Kudumbashree are basically women enterprises, right? So what happened was this, and I don't know this can be universalized at all, anecdotal, purely anecdotal, but I'll tell you, most of the work that had to be done during the COVID was home-based work. Right, you could not go out and work. And home-based work, who are the professionals in that? Actually, women are much more professional in home-based work, and they do actually most of the work. I mean, there is a large amount of work that are done through home-based work. So at least that segment of the work which used to be done through home-based work, that actually I don't think it is much affected because of production itself. But of course, on the demand side, that will be affected, right? But in terms of production side itself, and they have been able to diversify. In Kerala, I've seen this thing that some of the activities that they were doing earlier, they stopped that and they moved into sanitization, what we call sanitizer, making sanitizers, mask making, all these kind of activities happen. So, of course, the general effect has been devastating, no doubt about that. It has been devastating on the economy as such, but it is not as if that everything, the condition has been like completely out. After the COVID, there actually, COVID is very interesting thing to look at. I mean, after the economy after the COVID, I think it's going to look different from what we have seen now. That 2 years is going to actually take things a little bit different from what we had already seen. That's all I have to talk about that. Dr. Priyan's question with regard to university and private, the ABC categorization of skill and ITI firms. Of course, I completely agree with this thing. Unless until we are talking about university, I mean, what we call innovative firms and innovative universities or what we call training centers that are actually at the cutting edge. We are not talking much about skill gains to anyone as such. You might be giving some skills that may not lead to anything much in the future. In fact, if you look at the employability definitions that have been early definitions of employability, because of this thing, I had a chance to go through all these definitions about employability. And the thing is that employability the term itself came up in a very, very different context. I put it up, and I had put it up in the last slide in my presentation. Earlier, employment growth was part of the government's policies with regard to government had direct intervention possibilities in India as well as rest of the world also. But as and when the rest of the world, not in the Indian case, as the rest of the world's possibilities of spaces of intervention in employment generation reduced, the focus shifted to creating skill and other conditions such that no person will be remaining without employment. So a lifelong employment is there for every person that is there in the labor market. And that became the focus of the government themselves, right? So employability's meaning was that. But now today, when you're talking about employability, we are talking about the person's skills such that the firm can absorb this. The firm sees that this person is employable or not. So the perspective from which early definitions of employability came about has changed. But the point that I'm making is this, that unless until there is this kind of matching of the skill requirements in the industry and what is being produced in the centers, you're not going to find a skill match at all. And that's one thing. And that matching is very going to be very difficult if the firms, if the universities and centers, they do it on their own, because that matching is actually the requirement is actually in the firms. And you think that the university with a set syllabus can do it? I think however much advanced your university syllabus is, you will never be able to match with the firm's requirements. And that is something that you should leave with the firms. But of course, the government should facilitate that. And the university atmosphere should be such that it helps in this thing. That's the second question. Third question about Dr. Subrata's question about capital market issue. Yes, I did not touch about capital market issue at all. I did not do into that because the focus was on NEP. But I completely agree with that. In fact, I had made a small statement in between that the choice between wage work and skill work and self-employment is with regard to risks and uncertainties. When I said risks and uncertainties, I was trying to speak about the capital market. I was trying to throw light on the capital market in two first. One is in terms of credit, other in terms of insurance. These two facilities, and unless until you provide these two facilities, self-employment is not possible. But our focus is not on that. That is why. With regard to externalization and firms, externalization of skills and firm performance, I was not talking about firm performance as I was talking about the firms would want to externalize all those elements of the requirements of a firm that is not directly required for it outside. Why do they have to do it? Because it adds to the cost for the firm. But if it can be done by the government, then let the government do it. Why should the firm worry about it, right? So that is why the externalization takes place about. But that becomes possible because the general argument about skill failure and what we call the firms, it becomes possible because government itself is withdrawing from what we call as direct employment generation post. Then the blame would be falling on that you are withdrawing from employment, right? But then if you have to private employment by private firms, then the private firms should be given those workers who can be employed. So that is where the employability question comes in. If you ask me if it's a hypothesis, it is a hypothetical statement. That is true. I have not come across any arguments which say this thing, but it is not hypothesis that has been built by me alone. There are other works that are writing about this thing also, but I've not come across data that is talking about all these things. Fourth question regarding to Dr. Sonal, it's actually it's an interesting question because in future it's going to be a very important problem as to defining who is self-employed, right? I mean, professional, would you put him under self-employment? Currently, yes, all the people who are earning themselves, all their money that is earned is by not through wages, but through any forms of consultancy and all those things are accounted as self-employed as such. But increasingly, we are seeing that if you call, for example, the Uber driver or the Swiggy Zomato worker who's a partner and not a worker, of course, they are also professionalizing this, but I don't have a very clear answer as to after digitization, what would be the future of this thing? It is a problematic area, but we don't have answers for that. With regard to Padma Priya skill poor question, this can be back work for any NSS data. It's all from NSS and PLFS data. You can generate this thing because all the categories are available. Technical education, then vocational training and general education is available in this. It's just that I have classified it. I have used the same available data and classified in terms of you can use some kind of programming and then classify it with and without and so on. And then you can generate it. And I have named it a skill poor. Okay, you can name it the way you want, but that's what I have tried. And Dr. Hansajan's question, I don't think there is anything for me to say over there. I completely agree with the thing that rural employment question is a very pertinent question that is something, and I also that again reflects on what Professor Mehta had said in the beginning, that rural employment question, rural entrepreneurship, these questions are increasingly becoming difficult because of the way in which the urban bias in the entire thing, the entire story. What we had sometime in the 70s and the 80s, there was this conscious effort towards rural building assets. Now, of course, we do say that rural, but the way in which infrastructure is being developed, how the money is being pumped in, we know that actually there is an urban bias creeping back compared to the 90s or the 70s and 80s, which is coming back again. I'll stop here. We can take more questions. If you want.
Yeah.
And also everyone can compliment. These are just my answers. Of you can think what.
No, I think that's very nicely said. I just one small little reference I want to give to Padma Priya. That is a new article which has come in the IJL, Indian Journal of Labor Economics, this very recent issue. That's called Stalled Structural Change Brings an Employment Crisis in India by Santosh Mehrotra and Jajati Parida. So that actually also gives you this how to use the PLFS data in recent times and those classifications that Vinod mentioned. So,
sir, can you please repeat it? I'm sorry. Can you please repeat it once?
That's it's called Stalled Structural Change Brings an Employment Crisis in India. In Indian Journal of Labor. That's it. Yeah. So thank you very much. So now we go to the next batch and let's start with Professor Maruti from ISEC Bangalore. Please. Professor Maruti, please. I think you have to unmute. Professor Maruti, you have to unmute. Yeah.
Audible audio to you.
Yeah. Please.
So good morning to everybody, and especially Hamza. Long she was there in ISAC. So now on her invitation, I'm just listening to all people. And this new education policy to India becomes so tough, without theory, without theoretical work, without assumptions. One thing. The second thing, when the family and kinship-based entrepreneurship as a highly then why you require all the technical kind of educational institution in this country? What's the need? You just ruin it, bulldoze it. If you go back to the way back when we called it self-republic, self-republic was a self-sufficient kind of a country where without education, people's development very good. And also, if you look at the 21st century or 19th century, then we have introduced the institutions, technical institutions, training institutions, skill development kind of institutions. We saw much development and economic development and GDP, everything at top level. Again, you go back to the family and kinship-based enterprises, entrepreneurship. And I think we are going to ruin the national economy, our economy. And I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much. Anyone else, please? I will, of course, towards the end, make a special request to Professor Indira Hirve, sitting an expert on the subject, but that is towards the end actually. So, any other questions, please?
Yes, myself, Rashmi Misra from NCDS.
Yes.
Yes, is it audible, sir?
Yeah, it's audible. Please go.
Yes, thank you. So, we have discussed about specifically, I am talking about women entrepreneurs. So, when you were talking about women entrepreneurs, it was told that now during COVID time that the sanitizers, masks, these are that's mostly in Odisha. I think that our self-help groups and the Mahila Vikash Nigams, they are engaged in these types of activities like preparation of sanitizers and masks. But in the context of new educational policy, as we know, education is a very instrumental the role in increasing the participation, particularly the women in entrepreneurship. So my question is that how in this context, not only the self-help group or the rural women, but the housewives and also the women, educated women, then how to develop the skills in different types of activities, because you know the first generation and the second generation entrepreneurs that we have found in Odisha, particularly that the small scale or the big scale entrepreneurs who have, particularly I am talking about women, So in that area, my question is that how to motivate nowadays during this period, during this COVID situation, pandemic situation, that how to motivate them, what type of activities they will be involved, and what type of training they should be given. We have to focus on those issues to increase their income. So, sir, my question is in particular with that issue. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Any other question, please?
There are few questions in chat box. You may take them also.
Oh, okay. I have not seen that. Okay. एक second. But actually, I'm not able to see. I'm seeing only my access is only directly to Vinod. So I'm not getting that. Maybe if you don't mind, maybe Professor Jain, if you read out, I think that will be better. I'm not seeing those questions here.
We can't see the question, so you have to read, Hansa.
Yeah, that's right. Dr. Hamza, you have to read out the questions because I can't see anything in my chat box.
Okay. One question is from Sonal Yadav. I think that she has already asked that question. Then there is a question from Rashmi Chako. Will gig economy gaining momentum in mainstream have some positive effect in the employment scenario? Others have already asked the question.
Okay.
So,
if you don't mind,
yeah.
would you please repeat that Rashmi's question? I didn't quite.
Yeah. Will gig economy gaining momentum in mainstream have some positive effect in the employment scenario?
Okay. Anyone? I think Tara Nair, I think, wants to ask some. Yes, please.
Vinod, my question is about, it was an absolutely wonderful presentation. The way in which you built the, the different streams of, arguments and different streams of data, different streams of evidence has been extremely, inspiring. I was just thinking that, shouldn't we also consider the kind of structural transformation that, the countries like India, the emerging, developing are going through at this point in time? Because our conceptualization about innovation, skill, enterprise, everything is very manufacturing centered. That's how the whole debate really emerged. But we are, at the same time, we are experiencing a growth phase where we know that manufacturing is, has lost and progressively losing its significance. At the same time, we see a lot of trade and finance related, industrial activities coming up. Most of the startups, if you look at it, they are either in the entertainment field, media, finance, trade, commerce, e-commerce. These are the kind of sectors where perhaps the so-called innovations are happening. So when you talk about the mismatch between what the universities offer as technical understanding and what the industry need, the mismatch also partly, I think, arises from our conceptual inability to to bridge this gap. It's a theoretical gap, and it's also a kind of a gap in terms of strategy. When you talk about the ecosystem, the policy and all that. So I was thinking that that's a very significant, I think I also have problems about or questions about whether we, we interchangeably use self-employment and enterprise, but there's a theoretical understanding about self-employment as employment, as you said, which can happen even in situations of complete desperation, because I'm not able to get absorbed into the labor market, and then I'm asked to get into the so-called, precarious self-employment, micro pre-enterprise and all that, whereas enterprise is generally understood as driven by, in a very Schumpeterian sense, driven by enterprise and technological change and things like that. So there are certain interesting theoretical and kind of conceptual discussions, which I think can perhaps help build the argument further, is what I thought. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anyone else, please? Because we, or if I may, if there are no questions, then I think I'll request Vinod again to maybe give brief answers to, or whatever. I think two of them were not exactly questions,
Yes.
So maybe we can reflect on that. Please.
Yeah. So Professor Maruthi's question with regard to kinship-based entrepreneurship, I think so. Increasingly, I mean, there was this understanding. Generally, as part of our development planning thought, there was a general understanding that kinship-based entrepreneurship is a passing phase. It is part of the developing economy or the underdeveloped economy story. And as we move out from this particular stage, as we are moving and developing economy, as we are moving out of this particular low-level equilibrium, we are moving out. There would be more of enterprises that are growing, that come from non-kinship kind of environment, and that environment is a kind of set of formal institutions that would build, would allow for this formal firms to grow through non-kinship relationships as such. Now, I agree with the fact that kinship-based entrepreneurship is problematic. It is problematic not because of the enterprise itself, but it has a great chance of kind of perpetuating the different types of inequalities, discriminations, and all the kinds of social problems that we have been facing. It has the possibilities of that, right? But it was also the development planners, when they had thought about it, I think it was also their idea that the formal ways of entrepreneurship, entering into entrepreneurship, skill building and entrepreneurship, the idea was also to kind of wean out this kinship based entrepreneurship and move into the formal system. But unfortunately, I think increasingly we are seeing that this kinship-based system is perpetuating in India. It is not moving out, and it is being encouraged also. It is being encouraged in some sense or the other. I have heard at least many talks where it has been told, that our what we call as the Indian system of entrepreneurship is kinship-based entrepreneurship itself. Now, I don't know whether to call it. Whether we should be encouraging something like that, but for one, I take a position that it should not be, and that's my answer to that. The first thing. Second, Dr. Rashmi's question about women entrepreneurship. Yes, I mean, with or without COVID, I think that it is a very serious concern. Kerala I'll give examples from Kerala. I mean, Kerala has been, in fact, if you look at the data, you will see that Kerala is one of the lowest participation rates for women in the country, right? One of the lowest participation rates in the country, women's participation, if you look at. But if you look at women enterprises, Kerala is doing reasonably well, not in terms of employment, but in terms of enterprises. The enterprises, especially in the rural areas, rural enterprises in Kerala has been doing reasonably well. Okay, and one possible reason is the collectivization itself. Enterprises, when we were talking about collectivization, usually we hear about collectivization of workers, but here we have Kerala case. Of course, there are many other states which has got very successful programs, but Kerala's Kudumbashree program had been especially successful, especially in the case of entrepreneurship itself. You had small enterprises, collectivized units of collectivized entrepreneurship developed through the Kudumbashree program that had been very successful. And now the program is being kind of imitated in many other states in the country. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think even Odisha is using, Odisha is also part of the Kudumbashree expansion program that is going on right now. But of course, there is a lot of, unlike general entrepreneurship itself, women's entrepreneurship has very specific aspects that are beyond what we can call as the general entrepreneurship story itself, like what kind of products to enter into. I mean, given all the facts with regard to women's work and all the social norms that are associated with women's work, there are limitations to what you can enter into, what kind of production you can enter into, what is a workplace it should be. So there are limitations about all this. But even considering all these facts, it is possible. It's not that it's not possible. I think Kerala shows a way in this thing. In fact, over the years, slowly over the years, Kerala has the Kudumbashree movement, which had started off as vegetable, what we call vegetable agriculture, basically horticultural kind of things. Today, there are firms which are run by there are biotechnology firms, there are information technology firms that are run purely by Kudumbashree units. Biotechnology firms, there are taxi services that are run purely by Kudumbashree units. These have become large plants. I mean, they have started off as very small units, but now they have diversified into such vast fields, and they have entered into whole kinds of. Still, I mean, I would not even in my what we call even my thought, I wouldn't say that Kudumbashree has completely changed the patriarchal nature of Kerala society. I would not say that. But Kudumbashree has negotiated that. it was able to bargain, negotiate, and find a space for itself. And now it is there, and it is actually encouraged. So there are inspiring lessons to learn from Kurumasri for Odisha also to take up. So what kind of industries? I think those are questions that needs to be asked. That's the second question. The third thing is about Dr. Rashmi Chako's question about the gig economy and the employment scenario. Yes, I mean, if you ask me, the net employment effect of gig economy, that is to be seen. Why I'm saying it is to be seen, because it is actually creative destruction. It is actually killing some employment when it is generating some employment, right? It is taking away employment in some ways, and it is producing employment. What would be the net effect? That is an empirical question, right? So it's creative destruction that is going on. So would you say that whether gig economy is going to do an employment generation, overall net employment addition? I don't want to say that. I'm empirically, I would say it's an empirical question. That effect we don't know. But yes, gig economy is a promising sector for the youth, especially with some levels of education. It is a promising sector. So I would not discount it. I would not say that it should not be there. Yes, it is also part of the growing economy. Technology allows that, and we should grow. But if it is going to have an overall employment growth effect, that I am skeptical about that. That's the third aspect. Fourth aspect was Professor Tara Nayar's this thing about structural. I completely agree with that. The structural transformation story. In fact, I did not mention it in that many words in this thing. I also have at the root of my presentation, if you had looked at it, I also draw from actually structural transformation stories only, and I also keep that in the back of my mind when I compare between the developed countries and China and those countries, and I also have that kind of framework in my mind when I talk about. So when I talk about innovation and all those, it is still there in the back of my mind. I'm talking about the manufacturing-based structural transformation. But what you said is extremely true, and it is extremely relevant that what we have gone through is a different kind of a transformation. Indian economy is viewing a different kind of transformation, and the new firms that are growing up is a different set of firms that are growing, and the new entrepreneurship itself is whatever we are seeing in the startups in Kerala. Also, we have a lot of Kerala. In fact, is doing very well in the Kerala startup mission. This thing we are doing quite well on that. But the type of firms are nothing to do with manufacturing. These are all in the industries that what Dr. Tara Nayar had spoken about. Yes. So when we are talking, thinking about an ecosystem, we just need to bring in all these new elements. But the sad part, probably it's not a sad part of the story. It can be seen as an opportunity also. The sad part of it is that we don't have a predecessor to follow. That we don't know what is the path to follow. Like, so it has to be imagined, it has to be theorized, it has to be built. So we don't have a predecessor where we can say that structural transformation had occurred in this particular country in this manner, so we will follow this particular. We don't have that luxury, right? But that's also an opportunity because we are the first movers. We will be the first movers, and you all know the first mover advantage. When you have first mover advantage, of course, it is problematic, but you are the dominant in that area, right? So that kind of an advantage, we have both these things. So we should be moving into these new areas also. Thank you. And with regard to the distinction made between self-employment and entrepreneurship, I completely agree with that. Thank you very much. If there are any more questions, I'll take. Otherwise, thank you.
If there are any more questions, please, anyone wants to ask something or make a comment or something? Looks like there are no new questions for us or comments. I think, yes, Professor Mehta, yes, please.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to take forward from where Professor Abraham just left, that the question of structural transformation. I think I would like to add that we do have evidence of the kind of transformation and the state support. If we see the transformation happening, structural changes which happened in the Southeast Asian countries and the East Asia, also China. I mean, where the entrepreneurship and the move out from the agriculture and towards the periphery and towards more urbanization had some very supportive government policies, and it was not merely, of course, China had big industrialization and all that, but we also see that there was considerable self-employment ecosystem, support ecosystem there in Southeast Asia and East Asian countries, which is probably, we are now facing the same situation. And I think we have to learn from the experiences of other countries, and to that extent, possibly orient our education and skill development policies favorably. I think that is what I would do. So inter-country analysis and of structural transformation definitely would make sense for any student of this kind of a area of research. It was just my brief observation.
I'm wondering whether Professor Indira Hirve is there. She is there. Professor Indira, when you are around, like, at least I'm not seeing her now.
I can't see her actually. She was there.
Okay. Professor Indira Hirve, are you there? Maybe not, I think. So, Dr. Reddy, you want to ask something?
Sir, this is Dr. Chandrasekhar Reddy from Hyderabad.
Yes.
Recently, some governments are distributing money for poor people for self-employment without proper skill training. Is it possible to develop their own self without a proper training? Is it possible in India? That is my question, sir. Like Telangana and Andhra, they are making crores of rupees distributing for poor people for self-employment without proper training. Is it possible?
Ideally, not. Maybe Vinod would have an answer to that. But why you are saying that these are called self-employment? That's what I see. Is it just a kind of a, for mostly meant for the unskilled people or for unskilled jobs? Is that what you are saying? Or certain kind of skill formation which takes place at work or at the work site? So it may be, there are several such sort of activities where I can sort of employ someone and on site they can learn. That's how I think much of the informal work sphere in the unskilled domain works. But whether the state is funding for that, that I do not know. That part I have no idea. I mean, unless someone even in the audience wants to say something, I've never. I have not heard of such a thing. I think maybe we have come to more or less towards the last part of this event, which was very useful. That was mainly and primarily because of the very interesting, very erudite presentation by Professor Vinod Abraham. He also answered all the questions very intelligently and with a lot of sensitivity, I thought, to the issues which are raised. So it is an excellent event. So I think only if I may make one last small point, like through education, if you are thinking of like sort of moving to the next level, let's say, where everyone has an opportunity to have an income, or everyone has an opportunity to work and work in a decent fashion. Maybe we need to have some little extra focus on what to do with the disadvantaged regions, disadvantaged social groups. So what kind of sort of issues? I think with education, we should also look into those kind of pre-existing vulnerabilities of regions and societies. I think that is where maybe much of our success will lie. And there may be newer models. I mean, like I'm told that like there is something called a group entrepreneurship, for instance, where actually collectively you can sort of train. So you can impart education to a group of people who might be sort of working together, or sort of that maybe a kind of a synergy which comes from sort of group effort. So those are areas in which maybe we need to think. Everybody need not go and start a enterprise. See, I think there may be many who would be providing this kind of a crucial support services, and I think maybe we need to think on those lines. The worry really is as all of you know, that if you go by the most recent, like the 1920 PLFS data, if you see, not the 1890, the 1920, and if you just see the statistics on poverty, whether it is a kind of a head count ratio or by the absolute number of poor, we are sorry to say that both the proportion of people that is under the head count ratio and in absolute numbers, this has grown in both, let's say, in the two time points, let's say between 2011-12 and 2019-20. So apart from the question of employment, skill, entrepreneurship, there is also this question of rising poverty, and I think which is also exacerbated by the COVID conditions. So this really needs a serious rethinking, maybe sort of looking for sort of focusing on a wide range of skill sets which are actually going into the oblivion. So maybe we need to rethink that. Maybe we need to reposition, as Tara was mentioning, that maybe there is a bias towards a certain kinds of, let's say, modern manufacturing or modern services. We think that is where the employment lies. I think we really need to rethink so how we can also sort of regenerate our own, let's say, skill bases, and maybe a large number of people who are marginalized otherwise, they might also benefit, they might contribute to our knowledge base. So those are the sort of areas maybe we should think through. And from my side, I learned so much, and it was very useful sort of event for me. And I sort of hand it over to, I thank both Hamsa and Professor Niti Mehta, and I know them, they're also my very good friends. So, so I'm very happy to be part of this. And with this, I hand over to the Sardar Patel Institute of Economic and Social Research. Please. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Das and Professor Abraham. I think we are all very rich in terms of knowledge and insights today on this current area of discussion that is very much in focus these days. So as Professor Das has, and also Professor Abraham has rightly said, education, skilling and reskilling alone will not lead us to the next level. But we also have to look at the regional diversities, the socioeconomic groups, the backward areas, and a very cohesive and comprehensive policy focus and responses, as well as involvement of all the sectors, private and the government sector, has to be there if we really want to create employment, which is what is the ILO keeps saying is decent enough for some kind of an inclusivity and growth in the years to come. So I think with that words, I think I'll hand over now to Hansa to give a formal vote of thanks. And once again, my personal regards and thanks to both the speakers today. Thank you so much. And to all the participants for raising very pertinent questions and enriching the discussions today. Hansa.
Yeah. So now I propose vote of thanks. First of all, I congratulate Professor Abraham for excellent presentation. Starting from the role of entrepreneurs and challenges, he has presented the employment scenario in India with the help of data. He has also focused on less remunerative and uncertain condition in self-employment, agricultural workers, and in small micro units. He has pointed out the skewed distribution of firms in the country and mismatch of university education with what is required by the industrial firms, and suggested a policy shift from employment to employability. He has very well taken all the queries satisfactorily and answered to all of them very intelligently. Thank you very much, Professor Abraham, for sparing time and giving such a nice deliberation. I am also grateful to Professor Keshav Das for presiding over this event and handling all the responsibilities of the program and giving insightful remarks. I'm grateful to all the participants for joining with us. Apart from Ahmedabad and Gujarat, we have representation from Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Karnataka, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Assam, Andhra Pradesh, and others. I extend my thanks to all. It was a pleasure to have all of you with us. I hope that the participants have learned and enjoyed. Now I would like to make one announcement. We are having another webinar on National Education Policy 2020, and it is related to equity and inclusion. It will be on 13th August 2021, that is the day after tomorrow at 3 p.m. And the speaker is Professor Mona Khare from National Institute of Education, Planning and Administration, New Delhi. We invite all of you to join. We will share the joining link through email and WhatsApp. And so this concludes the webinar. Hope to see you all on 13th August. And thanks for attending. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Very nice, sir. Very nice.
You all bye.
Yeah.
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am,
Hanji,
ma'am, go with ma'am. I'm so sorry. In morning, I was driving the car, so the audio was on. So I had to mute.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, ma'am.
Yeah.
And thank you for the wonderful seminar. Ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay then. No,
Okay.
thank you very much. Yeah, bye.